I think it's time we have a little chat about everything that's been going on when it comes to anime licensing over the last year with its monopolization. Just a few weeks ago, Crunchyroll was officially bought by Funimation, meaning that Sony now owns a majority of the US licensing market, and a lot of things are going to change because of this. But before that, I want to focus on how we got here. Around the 2010s, companies were still adapting to the internet, so it was an awkward time when it came to anime streaming, especially since it was a niche thing. Netflix only had a few titles, primarily being Funimation shows, while they themselves had Funimation streaming. Around the same time, Crunchyroll would be taking shape into the form we'd be seeing for the next 10 years. This era was very rough around the edges because Netflix didn't have a lot of anime to watch, and Funimation streaming was and still currently is really bad. Crunchyroll figured it out pretty early on, but since they were only getting simulcast, their issue was that their catalog was a hodgepodge of titles. Due to all these reasons and more, it's why some multi-season shows were scattered across several platforms, making them really hard to watch officially. As well as when a new season of anime came, it was totally up in the air what was gonna land where. Is it gonna be on this platform, or this one, or is it gonna be shared between these two? It sucked, and all of this lasted for 5 to 6 years. Since it was the awkward teen years of the industry, companies were more focused on figuring themselves out rather than competing with each other. It's why their libraries are so removed from each other with pretty much no overlap. You get a Sentai for a certain set of anime that the other companies don't have, and this was for all of them. If a show got a new season, it would always go to the guys who acquired the originals since they were associated with it. Streaming was kind of a mess, but title-wise, everyone was playing nice. In these 6-ish years, anime would grow in popularity and streaming would get better because of that. Companies either having their own streaming platforms and the ones that didn't putting their stuff on Netflix. It was the most organized the streaming landscape had ever been, so it was a pretty great time to be a fan. Anime was doing so well that Sony wanted to take a piece of that pie and bought Funimation in August of 2017. This isn't where it all starts to go downhill, but we're almost there. Fast forward 2 months, and in October of that same year, Netflix announced that a good chunk of their $8 billion budget for next year will go into producing and acquiring anime. This is the bad part, because there are now 2 multi-billion-dollar corporations competing with each other for the same market. Netflix was still at the top of the game, so the only way Sony can match them was to acquire more anime by getting Crunchyroll. Before all of this, it was just a bunch of smaller companies that like anime and manga just coexisting, but now it's just 2 massive corporations fighting for all the monies. It's not a coincidence that in the last 2 years, companies have been taking licenses from one another. Netflix taking the 2nd season of Takagi and the 3rd season of Saiki-K, which are both Funimation shows, so if you want to continue them, you gotta go on the competitor. Or Funimation taking Log Horizon Season 3, which is a Sentai Filmworks show, and recently Megalobox Nomad, which was a Viz Media title. Or if you want to get really topical, JoJo Part 6, which that one is hella gross since Viz Media saved JoJo in America. This is for real some corporate toe-stepping taking place right now, Jesus Christ. The main point about all of this is how it's going to affect the industry. In the Sony press release, their goal is to create a unified anime subscription experience as soon as possible. It makes sense why they're doing this, but if this means we're losing the new Crunchyroll design for something done by Funimation, that will be a massive downgrade since not a single version of their site has ever really worked well, but that's a topic for another day. The main way this is affecting the industry is that since it's 2 massive corporations competing against each other trying to get as much anime as they can, smaller companies are being left out here to starve. They obviously can't compete with them since they're not backed by a company of a similar size, which is why they've been losing titles recently. So now I want to go through each one of them and talk about how they're going to fare in this new landscape. While Viz Media has been losing shows, they're gonna be totally okay. A lot of people forget that anime is their side gig and their main focus is licensing manga. They're one of the biggest in the market, but to stress how safe they are, I'm gonna list a couple of series they publish. Naruto, One Piece, Bleach, Hunter x Hunter, My Hero Academia, Black Clover, Jujutsu Kaisen, Dr. Stone, Demon Slayer, JoJo, and this is just when it comes to the shonen genre. If you go slightly to another, you get Kaguya and Komi-san, and these are huge too. This is only a handful of titles when they have hundreds of others of varying popularity. They can seriously drop anime altogether and they'd be totally fine. Next up is Discotek Media. A lot of you probably don't know them, but since I am talking about licensing companies, I wanted to take the opportunity to teach you about them. They're really unique because they're more focused on preserving anime rather than getting what's streaming. Though they have a lot of retro series, but it's not even limited to legacy titles. If the show was licensed at one point and hasn't been available for years, their goal is to make it accessible again through home video, like their upcoming Shaman King release, Hajime no Ippo, Sergeant Frog, Original Beyblade, and tons of others. For real, it's a lot of shows. But don't get the wrong idea, they also save a lot of modern shows that everyone didn't touch that were stuck only on streaming. Stuff like Hyosogiga, Reborn, Kimono Friends, Konosuba, Symphogear, and most recently the Black Rock Shooter TV anime, which I want to add hasn't been available to watch legally in almost 10 years. Oh yeah, and almost everything Lupin III. There is way more stuff I want to say about Discotek since this still doesn't present all the other awesome stuff they do, but this segment is getting pretty stale, so I'm gonna skip all of that. If you can't tell, they're gonna be okay too. They were never really involved in the modern market and were pretty much just hanging out doing their own thing, which is why many don't know them. The stuff they're after is not at all what Netflix and Sony want, so they're definitely gonna be the least affected by all of this. Next up is GKIDS, who focuses on acquiring foreign animated films, and anime just happens to fall into that. That's why I don't put them along the lines of the others. Japan just has a really high output of animated films compared to the other regions, and GKIDS gets a good chunk of them, which is why a lot of people think they're an anime company, even though you'll find stuff from many other places around the world if you go on their site. Like the prior, they're very removed from streaming, so they're not going to be affected. Finally, it's time to talk about Sentai Filmed Works. These guys are the most at risk. Even before all of this, they were never on the level of Viz Media or Funimation, being a much smaller company. It's why, unlike those two who released every anime with a dub, most of their catalog doesn't have one since they don't have that luxury. They pick which show to dub based on its popularity or what they see can turn a profit. But now that it's way more competitive, they haven't really been getting a lot of new titles in the last year or two. This is especially worrying since they're only anime licensing. If they can't get new stuff, people are gonna buy less from them over time, especially if their popular ones get taken like Log Horizon. It's the reason why Food Wars The Force Plate isn't on HIDIVE and why the dub of that season is now on Crunchyroll, even though they don't have the prior seasons. If you think it's because they have a streaming exclusivity deal, that's not the case since their logo appears after every episode before Sentai, and they were the people to announce Season 3 to be added to Toonami, compared to Sentai who did that for Seasons 1 and 2. It's also most likely the reason Season 4 of Haikyuu is being held up, so if you're wondering where that is, you can point your attention to them. As you can see, licensing has become so muddied in just 2 years that it's a lot harder to know who has what and how. It's why the Danmachi Season 3 clips on Crunchyroll's YouTube changed logo at the top right in the months it started airing. Sentai wanted people to know that this is their show and that Crunchyroll just happens to be streaming it, and they wanted to emphasize this throughout its entire run. I really don't want Sentai to go the way of ADV, which if you don't know, they shut down, because they're probably my favorite company with just how transparent they can be and a bunch of other cool stuff they do. But it's not all doom and gloom. They've actually adapted a lot to all the changes rather quickly, being used to outsource dubs for Netflix as well as Crunchyroll, which is why Food Wars voice cast is still the same. They've also started going back and dubbing their older shows based on feedback, which is very on brand of them. Since they've always done that, just now doing it more, allowing them to do re-releases as well. The big thing is that they're being used to produce the Blu-rays for these bigger streaming sites, releasing Crunchyroll shows before the recent buyout, like Science Fell in Love, Ascendant of a Bookworm, World Trigger was more on the way. Hey, there's Haikyuu! As well as releasing Netflix shows like Baki, Kakegurui, Ajin, Knights of Sidonia, and pretty much anything that's stuck on Amazon Prime. Insert Vinland Saga example here. There aren't a lot of options for Netflix and Amazon, so it makes sense for them to use Sentai and Viz Media, who both have been doing this for a few years now. Viz being the ones behind the Castlevania releases with a bunch of Crunchyroll titles in the pipelines, with Inspector being the first one out. But now there is a completely new problem that we've never seen before, being that Netflix prices their dubs too high for Sentai. So high in fact that it's just cheaper for them to produce, adapt, and cast their own dub of the show. This is what happened to Baki and is happening to Kakegurui, and I want to stress that these aren't redubs since those are meant to replace a pre-existing one of usually questionable quality. Replace it everywhere, but the original dubs are still going to be up on Netflix. This is just a different version. If you think this is confusing, Vinland Saga is on Amazon Prime sub only but has a Netflix LA dub for regions outside of the US, while being licensed for home video by Sentai with their own dub. A single show has 2 English dubs that were produced in 2021, think about that for a second. If you buy a show you see on Netflix, it's up in the air which version it's gonna be, which is really weird. This also makes Sentai look really bad because if anyone buys it, they're expecting the Netflix version. Outside looking in, it comes off that they wanted to redub it, and it's all just really bad for brands. You have to remember that it takes years for these series to come to Blu-ray, so the expectation is way higher than normal, and this is definitely going to make a lot of fans upset and feel cheated, which defeats the purpose of releasing a Netflix anime, since you're trying to profit off that audience. This only alienates them, risking future income. It's all really bad for everyone. It's making it harder for the consumer to get the stuff they want, while also risking the companies that help build the market to where it is. Sentai has always been walking on a tightrope that's gotten a lot shakier recently, which is why they're doing so much stuff, including taking an anime from someone with Lupin Part 6. I wanna be upset, but I can't since they're just playing the game everyone else is, and because they're in a way more desperate situation. Using the tactics that worked for your competitor, especially with a new installment of an iconic franchise, makes a lot of sense. The industry is a lot messier now, and Sentai is gonna need the most amount of help getting through it. I'm not saying blindly buy all their stuff and get their streaming service, but more along the lines that if there's ever a sale on a Right Stuff or Amazon, maybe just get a bit more of their titles than everyone else's. Just so it doesn't end with me being preachy for Sentai, I want to say that I really don't know what the next few years are going to be like for anime, especially with two faceless corporations running it, because as you can see, they really don't care.